Good Thursday afternoon. Thanks for joining us on KARE 11 News Now. I'm Chris Harabsky. We start off from our nation's capital today, where negotiations over funding for the Department of Homeland Security and ICE are not going well. Lawmakers already passing a funding bill to keep the government open through September. The only exception was funding for DHS and Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Democrats want to overhaul how enforcement is done, but they have to do it before next Friday, something Republican leaders say will be difficult to accomplish.
If they're coming to the table demanding a blank check or refusing to consider any measures but their own, they're likely to end up with nothing, which is fine if Democrats just want a political issue. But if they actually want to do something, then again, they're going to have to be willing to reach agreement with the White House on a final bill.
Meantime, in an effort to decrease tension around immigration enforcement in Minnesota, Border Czar Tom Homan says 700 federal agents in the state are leaving. Homan said this decision is a result of cooperation between county jails and the feds. That cooperation is allowing ICE to take custody of undocumented immigrants before they're released from jail. Homan did admit that Operation Metro Surge has not been perfect. He also said there will be one chain of command rather than two to ensure all federal agents are on the same page and, quote, follow the rules, end quote. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey says the operation is still going too far.
This is not about ICE doing normal ICE stuff. The objection is to ICE pulling people off the street indiscriminately. It's these roving bands that were walking through Minneapolis and targeting both Latino and Somali people without regard for whether any crime had been committed at all.
Homan says there are still 2,000 federal agents in Minnesota. He says a complete drawdown of federal agents will depend on continued cooperation between state and local law enforcement, as well as a decrease in the rhetoric and attacks against federal agents, he says. As de-escalation attempts come down from DHS, some educators and Minnesota school districts are now suing the federal government. They seek to block immigration enforcement in or near public schools. Education Minnesota, which is the union for the schools, says it filed the suit because attendance dropped drastically last month. Some districts reported declines of nearly 1/3, with others saying attendance fell below half. The group points to reports of students being detained near schools, bus stops, and dismissal areas, and they say the presence of immigration agents is creating fear and anxiety in classrooms.
Immigration enforcement activities are adversely impacting all of our students, irrespective of immigration status. It is not normal for elementary-aged kids to see a large portion of their classmates gone.
Educators are asking the judge to keep ICE and Border Patrol away from schools and transportation routes, except in extraordinary circumstances. Governor Tim Walz also calling for an end to enforcement near schools. Right now, habeas corpus lawsuits against the Trump administration are piling up, and sudden resignations of more than a dozen federal prosecutors are leading to a massive backlog of cases. To top all that off, an attorney that came in to help stop the bleeding has now been removed after standing in court yesterday and telling a judge, quote, "The system sucks. This job sucks," end quote. Here's Kent Erdahl.
At a hearing in federal court in St. Paul on Tuesday, Judge Jerry Blackwell again pushed the U.S. Attorney's Office for answers about failures to comply with court orders demanding the timely release of people unlawfully detained during Operation Metro Surge, adding, quote, "The court has had hundreds of these at this point." Attorney Julie Lee, who normally works as an ICE attorney in immigration court, responded in part, "They are overwhelmed and they need help. So I have to say stupidly enough, to volunteer. I have to be honest, we have no guidance or direction on what we need to do. And so when you showed up, they just throw you in the well and then here we go." In less than a month, Lee inherited nearly 100 habeas cases, including the case of a 19-year-old named Oscar, a Minnesota resident and South St. Paul grad who had legal status and a work permit, but was still detained for 19 days despite 3 court orders demanding his release. "I am not defending it," Lee said, adding, I did put in my resignation from the job too, but they couldn't find a replacement. Sometime I wish you would just hold me in contempt, Your Honor, so that I can have a full 24 hours of sleep. I work days and night just because people are still in there. The system sucks. This job sucks. And I am trying every breath that I have so that I can get you what you need. A day later, a Department of Justice spokesperson tells us Lee's detail with the U.S. Attorney's Office is now over. In response to her concerns, they added, if rogue judges followed the law in adjudicating cases and respected the government's obligation to properly prepare cases, there wouldn't be an overwhelming habeas caseload or concern over DHS following orders. Though Judge Blackwell didn't respond directly, he offered this explanation Tuesday, saying in court, what we really want is simply compliance, because on the other side of this is somebody who should not have been arrested, in some instances in the first place, who's being hauled in jail and put in shackles for days, if not a week plus, after they've been ordered released. Lee responded, I share the same concern with you, Your Honor. I am not white, as you can see, and my family's at risk as any other people that might get picked up too. So I share the same concern, and I took that concern to heart. But again, fixing a system, a broken system, I don't have a magic button to do it. I don't have the power or the voice to do it. I only can do it within the ability and the capacity that I have.
Kent Erdahl there. Again, Julie Lee has now lost that capacity, and she's not alone. Assistant U.S. Attorney Anna Voss, who also handles these cases, was in court yesterday but won't be for long. She is among the 14 people who have recently resigned. In response, the DOJ is reportedly requiring U.S. attorneys across the country to rapidly assign prosecutors that will be available to respond to other districts. According to Bloomberg Law, which broke the story, these so-called emergency jump teams will be used in areas that need urgent assistance. New today, strike averted. Hundreds of SEIU Health Partners workers have reached a tentative agreement after their most recent contract ended last week. According to the union, the agreement includes wage increases, more money for registered nurses and medical technicians, and a new labor management committee to talk about the impact of AI and healthcare work. In a statement to us today, Health Partners says, quote, we're pleased to have reached a tentative agreement that's fair to our colleagues and sustainable for our organization. We value our SEIU represented colleagues and their commitment to our patients and members, end quote. Results are in from Tuesday's Minnesota precinct caucuses, the kickoff to election season. It gives voters a chance to talk about the issues and show support for certain candidates. But this year, the turnout is telling its own story. The Minnesota DFL says a historic number of people, at least 30,000, showed up to voice their concerns, especially about ICE. The party's former DFL chair, Mike Erlandson, says Senator Amy Klobuchar, who has little opposition from other Democrats in the race for governor, was a popular name at caucuses.
If that extra turnout that we saw this week translates into extra turnout come November elections, I think you're going to see a very, very good year for Democrats.
Former Republican State Senate Majority Leader Amy Frederickson says although the issue of fraud hasn't made as many headlines recently, it was evident on Tuesday that it's still the dominant concern for Republican voters. Tuesday's straw poll results show House Speaker Lisa Damoth is the GOP's preferred candidate for governor. But Frederickson says party leaders will have to work on their messaging when it comes to how the federal administration handled the crackdown on immigrants in Minnesota.
I do think that it's something that all of Minnesota is bothered by. And I think that anyone who wants to run for office or lead the state is going to have to get a strong message about what happened was wrong.
We still have a long way to go before midterms in November. There are multiple events between now and then, including big state convention for both parties over the summer. Right now, fears of a modern nuclear arms race are rising. The last nuclear treaty between the U.S. and Russia expires today. That means the countries no longer have limits on their arsenals. China is rapidly building its own nuclear weapons supply. Critics say the U.S. needs fewer constraints as a result. President Donald Trump is calling for a treaty that includes the U.S., Russia, and China. And right now, a battle is brewing between the Trump administration and Minnesota over voter rolls. Minnesota Republicans in Congress are pushing legislation that would prohibit the state from receiving federal election assistance funds unless it hands over voter roll data, state data. It all comes as President Trump suggests nationalizing future elections. Here's Danny Spiewak.
Led by Republican U.S. Representative Pete Stauber, the Minnesota Voter Integrity Act threatens to terminate federal election funding unless the state provides voter records to the DOJ, such as documents related to the same-day registration process.
Well, it's not going to happen, and that's the extent of Pete Stauber's intellect and legislative abilities.
Stauber, who is not available for an interview, says the bill is designed to ensure our elections are fair and have full transparency. The legislation follows months of legal battles between the Trump administration and several states, such as Minnesota, over access to voter information.
Been a lot of talk about voter rolls and voter information recently, far more than is comfortable for me.
Democratic Attorney General Keith Ellison and Secretary of State Steve Simon argue that state law prevents Minnesota from handing over this sensitive data, which would include driver's license numbers and last 4 digits of Social Security.
But so far, those efforts have been rebuffed by courts, which have found the president just does not have the power to do these things on his own.
Derek Klinger works with the University of Wisconsin State Democratic Research Initiative.
Why the federal government wants this information is a little unclear.
Besides demanding state voter records, President Trump also suggested this week that the federal government should nationalize the state-run election system.
If they can't count the votes legally and honestly, then somebody else should take over.
Governor Walz expressed alarm about that idea.
It's very clear that there is no intention by this federal government to have fair elections. There's every intention to suppress those.
That's Danny Spiewak, and I just want to go on the record saying that we at KARE 11 have found not a single report of widely spread bad voter information or illegal voting in this state. It happens, but it happens at a small scale. We have seen no proof to refute that yet. Happening today, Anoka is making history, cutting the ribbon on the first city-operated cannabis dispensary in the state. All the earnings from the Anoka Cannabis Company will go to a fund set up by the City Council. However, it's not clear exactly what that money will be spent on. Anoka Enterprise Director Kevin Morelli says some of the money could go to parks, maybe river projects, or even reducing a levy in the city. Stick with us. We got more news and weather coming up after the break.